At night, the city of Chicago was quiet. The streets were empty, and only the sound of passing cars filled the air. Far away, at the edge of the city, stood a long row of storage units, cold, metal boxes lined in silence. In one of them, behind a rusty blue door, a small light flickered. Inside that narrow space lived a woman named Emily Carter. Emily was 32 years old. She had soft brown hair tied in a messy bun and eyes that once carried dreams, now they only held tiredness. She sat on an old blanket, wearing 2 jackets to stay warm. Around her were a few things: a sleeping bag, a plastic water bottle, a small box of crackers, and a photo of a young man smiling, her younger brother, Michael. Emily had been living in that storage unit for almost a year. No one knew. The manager thought she just stored old furniture there. Every night, after workers left and cameras turned off, Emily quietly slipped inside and locked the door from within. It was her secret world. Her hiding place. Her only home. Sometimes, she whispered to herself, "Just one more week, Emily. One more week and things will get better." But weeks kept turning into months. Life hadn't always been like this. Once, Emily was a teacher at Lincoln Elementary. She loved her job, loved the children, and loved reading stories to them. But then came the cuts, the layoffs, and the unpaid rent. When her mother got sick, Emily used all her savings for treatment. When her mother passed away, she had nothing left, not even hope. She lost her apartment. Then her car. Then her friends slowly stopped calling. The storage unit became the last place she could afford $25 a month. She told herself it was just for a few nights. But a few nights turned into a year. That night, rain tapped against the roof like soft fingers. Emily sat with her small flashlight, reading an old diary she kept from her teaching days. The pages smelled of ink and dust. She smiled faintly at a note one of her students had written long ago. "Miss Carter, you're my favorite teacher. You make school feel like home." Her smile faded. She whispered, "Home." It was a word that now felt far away. Then she heard a sound. A faint sliding noise under her door. Her heart jumped. She turned off her light and froze. Her breath became shallow. For a moment, all she could hear was her heartbeat. After a long minute, she slowly crawled to the door and looked down. Something was there. It was a small white envelope, neatly slipped under the metal gap. Her name was written on it, Emily Carter, in red ink. Emily stared at it. Her mind raced. Who knows I live here? Did someone see me? Is it a warning? She hesitated for several minutes before picking it up. The paper felt warm, like someone had held it just moments ago. With shaking hands, she opened it. Inside was a single note with 5 words written in neat handwriting. "You're not as alone as you think." She read it twice. Then a third time. No signature. No clue. Just that one strange message. Emily looked around the small room. Nothing had changed. Everything was still. She whispered, "Who wrote this?" Her first thought was fear. Maybe the manager found out she was living here and was toying with her. Then, for a brief second, she wondered if it was Michael. Her brother. Michael had left Chicago 5 years ago to work in California. They lost contact after Emily's life started falling apart. She had no phone now, no address, no way for anyone to find her. Could it be him? No. That was impossible. Still, something about the message, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt kind. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the metal ceiling, listening to the rain outside. The words echoed in her mind over and over again. "You're not as alone as you think." The next morning, she woke up early and stepped outside before sunrise. Her hands were cold, her breath fogging in the air. She looked around carefully. No one was there. She checked the small security camera above the office. Maybe it recorded something. But the screen inside the main office was always off at night. She couldn't ask the manager, it would expose her secret. So, she returned to her unit and sat down. She opened the note again, just to see if maybe she missed something. But no, just her name and that short line. Emily sighed. Maybe it's just a mistake, she said softly. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Someone knew about her. Someone had found her. Still, she decided to stay quiet. For the next 2 days, she acted normal, helping at the small diner nearby where the owner sometimes let her wash dishes for leftover food. She smiled, talked little, and avoided questions. But when she returned to her storage unit the third night, there was another envelope. Same handwriting. Same red ink. Her name again, Emily Carter. Her heart started to beat faster. She picked it up with trembling fingers and slowly opened it. Inside, one new line. Checkbox number 214, someone left something for you. Emily stood still, holding the letter tightly. She looked down the long hallway of storage units, cold, dark, endless. Box number 214 was 3 rows away. And suddenly, for the first time in many months, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear. Not sadness. But curiosity and a spark of hope. Emily stood in the cold hallway, staring at the note in her shaking hand. Checkbox number 214, someone left something for you. Her heart beat fast. The silence around her felt heavy. The dim lights flickered above her head as if the whole building was watching her. For a few minutes, she didn't move. Should I go? What if it's a trick? What if someone's trying to catch me living here? She looked down the long row of metal doors. Each one was locked, numbered in faded white paint. The air smelled of dust and old cardboard. Finally, she took a deep breath. Okay, Emily, just look. Then leave, she whispered. She walked quietly, her footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. When she reached unit number 214, her hand hesitated on the cold metal handle. The lock wasn't closed, just hanging there loosely. Slowly, she pulled the door up. Inside, it was dark but not empty. A small gray backpack sat in the middle of the floor. Nothing else. Emily looked around carefully. Nobody was there. She listened, no sound. Just the hum of distant lights. She stepped inside and unzipped the bag. Inside were a few things that made her eyes fill with tears. A fresh bottle of water, a wrapped sandwich, a warm blanket, and a small note that said, "You matter." Her throat tightened. She covered her mouth, holding back a sob. For months, no one had said anything kind to her. No one had looked at her like she existed. She sat down and touched the blanket. It smelled clean, like laundry soap. Someone had washed it for her. "Who are you?" she whispered. She carried the bag back to her unit and locked the door. Then she sat down and read the first note again. "You're not as alone as you think." Now, it made sense. Whoever was leaving these messages, they weren't trying to scare her. They were trying to help. But still, how did they know her name? That night, Emily couldn't sleep again. She kept watching through the small crack under the door, waiting to see movement or shadows. But nothing happened. Over the next few days, she became more alert. She noticed a black car parked near the storage gates late at night, always the same one. Its engine would turn off, and the driver would just sit there for hours. At first, she thought it might be the security guard. But the car looked too nice, shiny and well kept. Maybe it's the same person leaving the notes, she thought. One evening, at the diner where she washed dishes, Emily decided to ask her friend Sophie, the waitress. "Hey, Soph, have you ever seen someone watching the storage units at night?" Sophie wiped her hands on her apron and frowned. You mean the place near the highway? Not really. Why? Emily forced a smile. Oh, nothing. Just curious. She didn't want Sophie to know she was living there. Later that night, as she walked back, she saw the black car again parked under the same flickering streetlight. She walked past it quickly, head down, pretending not to notice. But she could feel eyes following her. When she reached her unit, another envelope was waiting under her door. Her hands shook as she picked it up. It read, "Don't be afraid. I just want to help." Emily froze. Whoever it was, they knew she was scared. They were watching closely. She looked around the hallway, empty. Still, she whispered to herself, "This is crazy. I can't live like this." The next morning, she decided she needed to know who the stranger was. So, she went to Sophie and asked to borrow something. "Can I use that small camera your brother left here last week? I'll return it soon." Sophie laughed. "The old one? Sure. But what are you planning to film, Miss Mystery?" Emily smiled weakly. "Just, something personal." That night, she hid the tiny camera in a corner of her unit, facing the door. If someone came again, she'd know who it was. Hours passed. The storage building was silent, only the sound of wind whistling outside. Emily sat quietly, pretending to sleep. At around 2 a.m., she heard its footsteps. Soft, careful, steady. A shadow moved under her door. Then the sound of paper sliding again. She waited, heart pounding, until the sound faded away. The next morning, she turned on the camera and watched the footage. Her hands trembled as the video played. There he was. A man in a dark coat, about 50 years old, with silver hair and glasses. He placed a letter under her door and looked around carefully before walking away. Emily's eyes widened. She knew that face. It was Mr. David Miller, her old high school principal. Her mind filled with questions. Why was he here? How did he find her? And why was he helping her secretly, without saying a word? For the rest of the day, Emily couldn't think of anything else. The memories of her old school, her students, her brother, everything came flooding back. Maybe David had found out about her from someone, or maybe, somehow, from Michael. That night, she opened the newest note. It said simply, "Please meet me at the diner tomorrow at 9 a.m. I need to talk to you." Her hands went cold. He knew where she worked. He knew her schedule. Part of her wanted to run, to disappear again. But another part, deep inside, whispered that maybe this was the sign she'd been waiting for. For months, she had been living in silence, waiting for something, anything, to give her a reason to hope again. Now, someone had found her. Someone who seemed to care. Emily looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror beside her bedroll. Her eyes were tired, but there was a spark in them again. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow, I'll find out the truth." Morning sunlight touched the edge of the city as Emily walked toward the diner. She wore her old brown coat and a scarf she found weeks ago at a bus stop. Her hands were cold, but her heart beat fast with nervous energy. She hadn't seen Mr. David Miller in almost 10 years. Back then, he was her high school principal, a kind man with calm eyes and a warm smile. But today, she didn't know what to expect. The diner was half empty that morning. The smell of coffee and pancakes filled the air. She stepped inside quietly and looked around. There he was, sitting in the corner booth near the window, wearing the same glasses, a cup of coffee in front of him. When he saw her, he stood up slowly, surprised and relieved at the same time. "Emily," he said softly. "You came." She nodded, staying cautious. "I saw your notes. You've been watching me, haven't you?" David looked down. I wasn't trying to frighten you. I didn't know how else to reach you. Emily crossed her arms, unsure. How do you even know where I live? He sighed. Sit down, please. Let me explain. After a moment, she sat across from him. The waitress came, refilled his cup, and left quietly. The air between them was heavy, a mix of confusion, fear, and curiosity. David began to speak, his voice calm but full of regret. Emily. I found your name on a community search list. It's a database we use for missing or homeless residents who were reported by their families. Emily frowned. Reported? By who? I don't have anyone left. He looked at her gently. You did. Your brother, Michael. Emily's breath caught. My brother. David nodded. He came to see me about a year and a half ago. Said you'd lost contact. He wanted help finding you. He told me you were struggling after your mother's death. He left his phone number and said, if you ever hear from her, please call me right away. Tears filled Emily's eyes. Michael was looking for me. David took a deep breath. Yes. He searched everywhere: shelters, schools, churches. But then. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. But then I heard about the accident last year. He didn't make it? Emily's world went silent. The diner's sounds faded away. All she could hear was the echo of those words. No, she whispered. No, that can't be true. David nodded sadly. I'm sorry, Emily. He loved you deeply. Before he died, he left me a letter, said to give it to you if I ever found you. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded envelope. Her name was written in her brother's handwriting, strong but a little messy. Emily took it with shaking hands. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single piece of paper, slightly yellowed. She read silently. Emily. If you ever read this, it means I didn't get to see you again. But I never stopped looking. I never stopped believing you'd find your way back. You were always the one who made others believe, the one who taught me to dream. If you ever feel lost, remember you are my home. Start again. Teach again. Don't hide anymore. Love. Michael. Her tears fell onto the page. She covered her face with both hands and cried quietly. David waited patiently. After a long pause, he said softly, he wanted you to have another chance. That's why I tried to find you. I wasn't sure if you'd even remember me, but I couldn't just leave you out there alone. Emily wiped her tears. You left food for me. The blanket, the water. He nodded. Yes. I didn't want to scare you, so I used notes. I thought if you saw small acts of kindness, you'd trust me enough to come forward. She gave a small, sad smile. I thought maybe it was a ghost. Or Michael himself. David smiled faintly. In a way, it was. His kindness never left. They sat in silence for a few moments. Emily stared out the window. The world outside looked different now. Not softer, not easier, but somehow lighter. David leaned forward. Emily, listen, there's something else. I'm part of a small community program now. We help homeless people rebuild their lives. We offer training, housing, and sometimes, teaching jobs. You were one of the best teachers I've ever known. You could help so many people. Emily looked down. I don't know if I can do that anymore. I don't even know who I am. He smiled warmly. You're still the same Emily who changed lives in that classroom. You just need someone to believe in you again. For the first time in years, she felt someone truly saw her, not as a broken person, not as a failure, but as someone who still mattered. She nodded slowly. Maybe I can try. Just try. David reached out his hand gently. That's all you need to do. As she left the diner, the morning sun touched her face. The city seemed alive again, cars honking, people walking fast, laughter from across the street. Things she hadn't noticed in months suddenly felt real again. She held Michael's letter close to her chest. For the first time since he left, she didn't feel completely alone. That night, when she returned to her storage unit, she looked around at the cold metal walls, the boxes, the floor she slept on. It wasn't home anymore. It was just a place she had survived. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Michael. I'll start again." Then, she packed her things, the few items she had, and zipped her bag. Tomorrow, she would go meet David again. Tomorrow would be the first day of her new life. The next morning, Emily woke before sunrise. The cold air filled the storage unit, but something inside her felt warm, a quiet strength she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked at the small space one last time. The metal walls, the thin blanket, the cracked flashlight, they had been her home for a year. A secret home. A painful one. Now it was time to leave. Emily packed her few belongings, her brother's letter, the old diary, a photo of Michael, and the small backpack David had once left for her. She stood at the door, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Goodbye, old life." When she stepped outside, the morning sky was painted in orange and pink. The city was waking up, cars moving, people rushing, life happening. For the first time, she felt like maybe she could be part of that life again. She met David at the diner again that morning. He greeted her with a smile that felt genuine and full of hope. "You're here," he said softly. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Emily nodded. "I almost didn't. But then I thought, my brother wanted me to start again. I can't keep hiding." David smiled. "He'd be proud of you." Over breakfast, he explained more about the community program. It was called Second Chance Outreach, a small local group that helped people rebuild, find work, learn new skills, and get housing support. When Emily heard they also had a literacy program for homeless children, her heart skipped a beat. "You mean, teaching kids?" she asked. "Yes," David replied. "We run a small classroom in the back of a church downtown. The children come from shelters. They need someone patient, someone who understands what it means to struggle." Emily smiled faintly. "That sounds like me." David laughed softly. "Exactly like you." 2 days later, she visited the classroom. It wasn't fancy, just a few tables, old chairs, and walls covered with children's drawings. But when she stepped inside, she felt something familiar. The smell of books, crayons, and chalk brought back memories of her old school days when she was still Miss Carter, the teacher who believed every child could shine. A little girl with curly hair looked up and said shyly, "Are you our new teacher?" Emily's eyes softened. "Maybe. Would you like that?" The girl smiled wide. "Yes. We need a nice one." For the first time in years, Emily laughed. A real, gentle laugh that came from the heart. That day, she helped the children read simple stories. Her voice was soft at first, but soon confidence returned. The kids listened closely, some smiling, some whispering to each other. David watched from the door, smiling. After class, he said quietly, "See? You still have it?" Emily looked around the room, the drawings, the laughter, the hope. She nodded slowly. "I think I needed them as much as they needed me." Over the next few weeks, Emily began rebuilding her life piece by piece. She got a small room through the program, just a bed, a window, and a little desk. But to her, it felt like a palace. Every morning, she'd wake early, hold Michael's letter for a moment, and whisper, "Thank you." Then she'd head to the classroom. Each child reminded her of why she loved teaching, their curiosity, their laughter, their simple joy. One day, she brought her old diary and read them a story she once wrote for her students years ago about a bird who lost its wings but learned to fly again through courage. When she finished reading, a little boy raised his hand. "Miss Emily, are you the bird?" he asked. She smiled, eyes glistening. "Maybe I am." Later that week, after class, she found an envelope waiting for her on her desk. Her heart skipped a beat. It looked exactly like the old ones she used to find at the storage unit. Inside, a note said, "Michael was right. You were meant to teach again. David." Emily smiled through tears. That night, she sat by her small window and looked up at the stars. She imagined Michael somewhere out there, smiling back. In her heart, she could almost hear his voice saying, "You're not alone anymore, Em." She whispered into the quiet night, "I made it, Mikey. I started again." Weeks turned into months. Emily's classroom grew. More children came. The program got new donations and volunteers. She worked hard, always with kindness, always remembering where she came from. Sometimes she told her students stories not about herself, but about a woman who once lost everything and found hope in the smallest message. The children always listened closely, eyes wide, waiting for the ending. And she would say softly, "That woman learned something important, that even when the world forgets you, one small act of kindness can remind you who you are." They always clapped, and Emily would smile because she knew that story wasn't fiction. It was her truth. That evening, she walked past the old storage unit building one last time. The blue door of her unit was still there, rusted and silent. She slipped one last envelope under it. It read, "Hope lives here now." Then she walked away, head high, heart light. The story that once began in darkness had finally found its light. A full year had passed since Emily Carter left her storage unit behind. The woman who once hid in the dark now stood in the light, teaching, smiling, and living with purpose again. Every morning, she arrived early at the Second Chance Learning Center, her small classroom at the back of the church. The children always ran to greet her, shouting, "Miss Emily! Miss Emily!" She would laugh and hug them. Their joy filled her heart in a way nothing else could. The classroom walls were no longer plain. They were now covered in bright drawings, colorful charts, and messages of hope written by the students. One big poster above the whiteboard said, in big letters, "You are not alone." Those words meant more to Emily than anyone could guess. Her life had slowly rebuilt itself, one act of kindness at a time. She now lived in a small rented apartment near the school, nothing fancy, but warm and safe. She had a job she loved, friends who cared, and a reason to wake up every day. Yet deep in her heart, Michael's words still guided her. Start again. Teach again. She never forgot them. They became her compass, her strength. One cold afternoon, as Emily finished her last class, she noticed a new volunteer waiting near the doorway. It was Lily, a young woman in her 20s, nervous and quiet. David had mentioned she was new to the program, recently homeless, trying to find work. Emily smiled kindly. "You must be Lily. David told me you'd be helping us today." Lily nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I don't really know what to do, but I can help with anything." Emily saw the tired look in her eyes, the same look she once had. That mix of fear, shame, and exhaustion. She placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "You'll learn quickly. Come on, I'll show you around." They spent the afternoon sorting books and cleaning the classroom. The children had gone home, and the sound of their laughter still echoed faintly in the hall. When they finished, Emily handed Lily a small sandwich and a cup of hot tea. "You haven't eaten much, have you?" Lily looked surprised but grateful. "How did you know?" Emily smiled. "Because I've been there." Lily looked at her curiously. "You? But you're a teacher here." Emily nodded slowly. Yes. But before that, I lived in a storage unit. For a year. Lily's eyes widened. You're kidding. No, Emily said softly. I had nothing, no job, no home, no family left. But someone found me. Someone who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. They gave me a message that changed my life. What message? Lily asked quietly. Emily looked at her with gentle eyes and said, You're not as alone as you think. Lily stared at her, and then her eyes filled with tears. She looked down, whispering, I needed to hear that. Emily smiled and squeezed her hand. I know. That's why I'm telling you. They sat together in silence for a while, sipping tea. The room was peaceful, the evening sun glowing softly through the window. Then Lily spoke again, her voice trembling. I've been sleeping behind the bus station for 3 weeks. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want them to think I'm useless. Emily shook her head gently. You're not useless, Lily. You're just lost. And lost doesn't mean broken. It just means you haven't found your way yet. But you will. Lily wiped her eyes. Do you really think so? Emily smiled warmly. I don't just think so, I know it. Because I did. That night, when Emily went home, she opened the small wooden box on her desk. Inside were the notes from her past, the first one that said you're not as alone as you think, and Michael's letter. She kept them safe, as reminders of where she came from. She picked up a pen and wrote something on a fresh piece of paper. It read, You are stronger than your worst day. She folded it neatly and placed it inside a small envelope. The next day, before class, she quietly slipped that envelope into Lily's backpack. Later, she saw Lily open it and smile, a small, shy smile, the kind that comes when someone finally feels seen. At that moment, Emily realized something powerful. The kindness that once saved her life was now moving forward through her, to someone else. Michael's message wasn't just about starting again. It was about passing hope forward. Months later, the classroom had grown even more. The children were thriving, and Emily had trained 2 new teachers. Lily had also found her footing. She was now teaching reading to younger kids twice a week. One afternoon, as the sun set outside, David visited. He stood at the door, smiling proudly. I just wanted to see how my best teacher was doing. Emily laughed. You mean your most talkative one? They both smiled, looking around the happy classroom. David said quietly, You've made this place something special, Emily. She looked at the wall where the children's drawings hung, at the laughter that filled the air, and then back at him. I didn't do it alone, she said softly. Hope did. Outside, as she walked home that evening, the city lights glowed bright against the dark sky. The same city that once ignored her now felt like home. As she crossed the street, a small boy dropped his notebook. Emily bent down, picked it up, and handed it to him with a smile. Here you go, sweetheart. Don't lose your stories. The boy grinned. Thank you, miss. Emily watched him run away, full of life, full of dreams, and whispered, Never stop writing your story. That night, she placed a new sign above her classroom door. It said simply, Hope lives here. And indeed, it did. Because once upon a time, a lonely woman living in a cold storage unit received a small note that said, You're not as alone as you think. And those words changed everything, not just for her, but for everyone she touched after.